So the fourth question for materialists, this one's a little bit different, but we'll see why it's relevant in a second. Why think in terms of general principles? Why think in general principles or categories? Now, this one's a little bit not quite as clear maybe as the first three and as the fifth one will be. But we think in terms of classes and general principles all the time. As human beings, we categorize things, and to think at all, you have to be able to think in terms of generality. So for example, when we see cows in a field, we don't see them as each individual particular. The reason we can even say cows is there's something that they share in common with all other cows that makes them in that general class of cows, right? You can think in terms of other generalizations. If I say, well, here's one that's good. Groceries. Groceries is a generalization, or it's a class of things. But if I say go to the store and get me some groceries, you won't know exactly what I mean. No one's actually seen that actual class generalization of groceries. No one's ever seen what it means to be, what the class or generalization of being a cow is either. Like in philosophy, you'd call this cowness. What puts them all together and makes them have the same class of being a cow that we can distinguish them from being a cat, being marbles, running, these different classes and generalizations that we put in things. But those are conceptual things that we think. They're not physical stuff that we think of, okay, I have an idea of groceries. I have an idea of the general category of cats or cows or marbles or running or groceries. But, and that is something we kind of take for granted, but it's something that makes thinking possible, because otherwise every single thing is a unique particular that you would not be able to make any sense of, because we couldn't put it together and say, okay, these things are in a class, these things are different, and categorize them. But materialism only allows for concrete particulars. Every situation, every item is new and different, and you can't have what we might call abstract generalizations. Meaning, when I talk about groceries, that's not a physical thing in the world. That's an idea. It's a concept. It's a category or a class. But remember, for materialism, it doesn't allow for the reality of things that are not material. So human thinking operates on those generalities, the similarities between things. And then we connect content and ideas together and events. And we say, okay, and we're able to say, okay, the things that I experience, this situation is not quite the same, but it is similar to this situation. And so like driving a car or something, it's not radically new every time you do it. It's something that you get in, even if you get in another car and it's a new situation. I've driven a car before, I understand how it works, and you take that experience, you say, okay, this is a similar experience to when I've driven a car before, and I connect it to now when I'm driving a car, because they're in a class, they're in a category together. But in materialism, you wouldn't be able to do that, because that's an abstract idea, it's a thought, and it's not something made of matter in the physical world. And so here's some blanks here on the next page. In terms of abstract generalizations, meaning ideas that we think of that aren't physical, there are classes of things. Classes are descriptive. So you have descriptive classes: cows, cats, groceries. And then descriptive categories. And then you have things like the laws of logic that are immaterial and prescriptive. Okay, so let me read that statement again. So in terms of abstract generalization, meaning concepts that we think of that aren't physical, Classes are immaterial descriptive categories, meaning they describe things, they don't require anything. So when I say these are marbles, that's descriptive. I'm not saying should or shouldn't or anything like that. And then laws of logic are immaterial prescriptive, meaning they tell you laws of logic require certain ways of right thinking to be correct. Meaning if you break a law of logic, you say or think something that's illogical, it's a mistake automatically, it's an error. And so these are prescriptive. But both of these things, classes and laws of logic, they're immaterial. They're non-physical, non-matter things that we need and use all the time as human beings, and we have to. But materialism could not account for either of them. It can't account for categories. It can't account for laws of logic. So basically, to be a materialist, you'd have to get rid of generalizations, general principles, and you'd have to get rid of the immaterial laws of logic. So anytime a materialist wants to be logical, they're not being consistent with their worldview, because they're calling somebody to a non-material standard that is universal, that requires correct thinking, or else it's a mistake. But in a materialistic worldview, that wouldn't be true. So if they want the laws of logic, you can't be a materialist because they're non-material. And if you want materialism, you have to abandon logic. And so there would be no reason to be logical, think correctly in the materialistic worldview. So you have these things, these classes and categories. You have the laws of logic, but materialism has no reason to believe in either of them because they're immaterial. We use the laws of logic. We talk about the God of truth, the God who cannot lie, like Brett taught on last week in church. But the laws of logic are not something that are a physical quantity extended in space that you can grab and take and look under a microscope or look at with a telescope. It's not something that works that way. But it's impossible not to use them, right? So, and it's one of those things that even if somebody denies the laws of logic, they can't escape using them. And so, basically, materialism has to reject these things. But people who are materialists often they have to think in generalizations, and often they will call people to be logical, but it doesn't fit with their worldview. If it's just stuff, there's no reason for my marbles to be logical. Right? My marbles cannot think in general classes or categorizations. So so the fourth question: why think in terms of general principles when we know that there are things that are abstract, immaterial, and non-physical? There's a debate that I recommend listening to if you guys are interested. There's a debate between great Christian apologist and writer Greg Bahnsen, borrowed a lot of his material, and then the 5 questions are his as well. He's in a footnote in here. He had a debate with this atheist writer and I believe professor. I think his name was Gordon Stein. But anyway, they're in this debate, and the atheist Stein was basically trying to make the point that it doesn't make sense to believe in a God who's not seen, not a physical, not extended in space, not, material, all these things. And so they had a question and answer part of the debate, and Stein asks Bahnsen, can you think of, he goes, well, okay, what do you think material means? And Bahnsen says, well, something that's or immaterial. What does that mean? He goes, something not extended in space, right? Like space, this physical world. And he goes, can you think of anything else besides God that is immaterial, universal, not extended in space? And Bahnsen says, yeah, the laws of logic. So he says, look, and everybody in the audience laughed because they realized, well, yeah, the very thing that you're trying to use to argue against me is the thing that you're arguing against by your atheistic worldview and being a materialist. So Bahnsen called him out on that and said, yeah, exactly. The laws of logic, the thing that you're calling me to, is something that you would have to abandon if you were a consistent materialist. But if you abandon the laws of logic, there's no point in a debate, showing one side or the other. So, like I mentioned last week, Bahnsen used to say that his opponents, who were atheists and materialists or naturalists, that they lost the debate by showing up. Because engaging in debate only makes sense if what the Bible says about the world is true. That there's a truth, there's absolute truth, there's logic, and we can show the differences, and that there's also human agency to say, okay, I see truth, I see lies, I see right, I see wrong, and then humans can recognize those things and have an obligation to choose between them and choose the right thing. But you don't have that with marbles debating, right? They don't debate, they don't do anything. They just are there, and they're matter in motion. But so if you show up to a debate on the basis of being a materialist, you have some pretty serious problems, because as soon as even if you debate really well, you've shown your worldview isn't true, right? It's what I talked about last week. It's a performative contradiction. It's like somebody saying they don't believe in words. And they can make a great speech on how they don't believe in words. It's actually kind of funny. They have books about people saying the Bible can't be understood, can't be clear, and that they actually have books about how human language is incomprehensible, that human language cannot be meaningful. But they're writing books, and when they write their books, they expect people to understand what they're saying, and so it's amazing the contradictions that people get themselves into, and that we would as well. That we're not totally consistent in our thinking either, but we have a reason to be, and we have a requirement from God to be more consistent in our thinking, which the materialist, if their worldview is true, has no reason to justify.